My name is Craig Peaslee, the composer of Second City Strut, which I recognize, being written for full orchestra, is probably an outlier of the works being presented at our ISJAC virtual conference. However, in skimming some of my fellow posters' presentation topics, it appears that I am not alone in speaking about the hybridization between jazz and classical music genres. To start with, I wanted to touch on jazz elements that I utilized within Second City Strut and how I incorporated classical elements that address similar, if not the same, parameters. That being said, Second City Strut is a jazz composition that fully embraces contemporary classical compositional techniques, some of which I'm going to discuss in here in short, and then one of which I'm going to delve in really deep. And the reason being is that I think it's the one element that really does a great job of combining the two classical and jazz worlds and keeping them on equal footing. The first of these parameters is the harmonic language. So, as jazz harmony is concerned, I use not just your basic root, third, fifth chords, but also the extensions thereof, or sevenths, ninths, elevenths, thirteenths, and chordal chords. I utilize chordal chords quite a bit to help come across with a, so to speak, blue sound. And chord progressions. A little bit I leaned on, or I should say kind of more in like a certain section. You probably noticed it when you listen to the work. I lean on the old tried and true chord progressions at 6-2, 5-1. Nonetheless, with this harmonic language, it's jazz-based harmonic language, where the chordal chords and harmonies are used throughout. I augment this with the classical elements, in which incidental harmonies are created from the web of lines occurring from what I'm going to be calling and referring to as the Strut Theme, which I will get to in a bit, and sound masses from the classical world, meaning not just cluster chords, but cluster chords utilizing microtones. In my case, it's quarter step intervals creating this sound mass. Commonly, I utilize these sound mass chords in an upper register. So what it effectively did was create a massive sound in the upper range, and then with the strut theme with these incidental harmonies being created, it kind of ended up being another sound mass in the low range. A prime example of this would be on page 8 in the score. Throughout the work, these three harmonic elements have a certain hierarchy to their parts that usually takes place. The quartal and tertiary chords that appear to relate and interact more with the principal melodic content are truly in the foreground. The quarter tone sound masses are certainly in the background. And this wall of sound created from the strut theme would also be in the background. And depending on what your ears tell you, the quarter tone sound masses are the furthest in the background, or this wall of sound in the lower sound mass is the furthest one in the background. Rhythmically speaking, the jazz element that is really at play and noticeable is establishing a groove and making use of the swing rhythm. And to help get that swing rhythm, basically the whole piece is written in 6/8. Past experience has taught me that I can't write things in 4/4 and write on the top swing while having a work created for classically trained musicians who are very ingrained and studied and schooled in the classical realm of things without having much exposure or practice in jazz music. Now, Now, the classical element that I kind of make use of within rhythm is what I'm calling a gestural rhythm or gestural figures. These gestural rhythms and figures are created through multiple different tuplets being performed simultaneously. So I'll have one line being nothing but, say, straight 16th notes, and then another voice at the same time playing quintuplets against those 16th notes. Another one might be playing septuplets, and so on and so forth. So what I label as these gestural rhythms and figures are actually not the individual lines themselves, but the sound created by the collective ensemble at those moments. Ultimately, we find the sound having a specific motion and destination. So, like a low to high register, high to low, maybe soft to loud, loud to soft, low and soft to high and loud, so on and so forth. So, it's not really a sustained harmonic massive sound like those quarter step chords that I was speaking about earlier, but a mass of sound in motion. A sample of one such moment begins on page 56 of the score and at the 9-minute 57-second mark of the recording and goes to the end. The final jazz element that I'm going to speak of, and this is the one I'm going to go in depth about, is a walking bass line, which is augmented through imitative counterpoint from the classical world. I wanted to point out what really served as the impetus to Second City Strut, and that is James Aikman's violin concerto entitled Lines in Motion. And it's the first movement. He's created what he called this non-literal counterpoint in constant similar rhythmic motion. Now, I'm going to highlight this section here of Aikman's description, the constant similar rhythmic motion. Now, to me, this described a walking bass line. And ultimately, I then imagined what numerous walking bass lines would sound like when piled one on top of the other. So I built things from the bottom up, whereas Aikman, in his violin concerto, he uses the same idea, except he starts in upper voices and works his way from there. Now, I have included a direct link for audio to Aikman's violin concerto, the movement in question, so I hope you're able to take a look at that as well. The Strut Theme, this walking bass line that becomes that walking wall of sound, this massive sound that's kind of on the low end where all these incidental harmonies are created. And this is what I utilized to help make this Second City Strut, well, strut. So I created this bass line developed out of a newly created scale or mode and had it go through a cycle, that cycle being the root of this scale, fifth, fourth, and then second, third, sixth, and seventh. Now that seventh acts as a leading tone, bringing us back to the root, fifth, fourth, sixth, third, seventh, second. And that second acts as a new leading tone to the third of whatever point we are at in that scale. So in this initial case that we're looking at, we see that F is our root, and G sharp being that second acts as a new leading tone to A, and A then becomes the new root. So this is a constant recurring pattern that is continually transposed in the one voice itself as well as all of the other voices that come in. Before we were looking at that where we first hear our strut theme with just the contrabass alone. Well, it eventually evolves into all of the string parts entering. All of the string parts are in divisi. So there's 10 independent lines occurring all at the same time. This section here that we're looking at is score page 6, measures 70 through 81. I'm going to play this so that we can hear it all with just the string section isolated. And as you can see, I'm going to circle all of the roots of these patterns. And you can see that each one of them follow that same pattern as before. Root, 5th, 4th, 2nd, 3rd, 6th, 7th. Bring us back to the root, 5th, 4th, 6th, 3rd, 7th, 2nd, which brings us to the new cycle. And ultimately, this creates a massive sound with uniform timbral quality, laying down a foundation, whether it's a harmonic foundation, it's a rhythmic foundation, and even to a certain degree, a melodic foundation. What I learned, I could put anything over this and feature above this backdrop, such as the principal melody. And it did not matter what key, mode, harmony, harmonic function, etc., 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 of that new foreground material. As with any thematic material, you want to vary it to help keep your audience engaged and interested. So different ways that I varied this strut theme were with interruptions, that it would be going and then it would just get cut off. One occurrence of these interruptions happens on page 9 of the score, and it's measures 107 to 108. It's just a brief moment. On the recording, as you can see, at the 1 minute 53 second mark. There are also moments where I move into from this chaotic mess, where something is happening on every one of the 6 beats in these 6/8 measures, and it slowly get back into that established swing groove. If I did it that way, why not do it in reverse, going from that swing groove into a chaotic mess? I also changed the timbre of it. It doesn't just occur in the pizzicato strings, but also utilized it with the woodwinds, starting on the beat at rehearsal marking N, which is page 21. So everything is on the 1 and 4 of these 6/8 bars, and then I also did it off the beat, so it ended up being on the 3rd and 6th eighth notes of the measures. There was also moments where I vary the strut theme through timbre and register and completely displace it. One moment that really stands out like that starts at measure 420, which is page 37, starting with the tuba. This is after kind of a long break in silence. The tuba comes in, and then it's joined on that second note of the theme with a flute that is something like, if memory serves me right, like 4 octaves higher than where that tuba was. This timbral and registral displacements in the strut theme continue on to measure 428 before settling back in with the strings on pizzicato. I would like to thank you for tuning into my, brief introduction and presentation on the Second City Strut. I hope you enjoy listening to the work and learned a little bit about what I kind of think helped bring this jazz and classical world together. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, by all means contact me, and I hope to have several thoughtful and wonderful discussions going on today. Thank you.